Welcome to Beyond the Beat, your go-to source for insider knowledge on fantasy football. Hosted by Zach Hiduk and Matt Olson. We bring you straight to the action with exclusive interviews from NFL beat writers, draft experts, and film gurus. Get the news from the field, straight from the sources at training camp and beyond. This is where fantasy wins are made.
Welcome in, everybody, to Beyond the Beat, brought to you by 32 Beat Writers. My name is Zach Hiduk, and today I'm here with Courtney Cronin. Courtney is a reporter with ESPN NFL Nation, covering the Chicago Bears. She's also, of course, a national host on ESPN Radio and makes regular appearances on SportsCenter, First Take, and Around the Horn, as well as on ESPN 1000 in Chicago. You've heard her on the show before. Courtney, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's been a busy week here in Chicago, so it's nice to kind of download and decompress and try to, I guess, sort through all of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to join us here. As you mentioned, a busy week. Last time we talked, I think it was like August 22nd there, through training camp and all of that. And we were kind of optimistic about, cautiously so, I suppose, in some ways, about where things were headed. Caleb Williams is finding himself in a pretty good situation for a first overall pick as compared to most, was kind of our evaluation at that point, and things seem to be going pretty well. They've now, however, fired their offensive coordinator mid-season. So I guess to just kind of kick everything off, what has the journey been from kind of where we were at then to where we're at now?
Yeah, so you start out the season and you're covering a team that can't rely on its offense for the first 3 games. And that's why they start out 1-2. Of course, the thrilling finish that they had in that Tennessee game where Caleb Williams throws for 93 yards. If it's not for a blocked punt that is ended up return for a touchdown, and then a Tyreek Stevenson pick 6 off of a baffling Will Levis decision, they don't win that game. Then they start at 0-1, and the questions about the sky falling would have started earlier than they are currently. But there was a stretch against a Rams team that looked completely different than it does right now. No Puka Nacua, no Cooper Kupp. They were super injured up front. They beat them. They beat the Carolina Panthers, and then they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars to go into their bye week, which is the earliest bye week they've had under Matt Eberflus at week 7. Feeling pretty good about themselves. They're 4-2 coming out of the bye. They're expecting to play Marcus Mariota, not Jaden Daniels in Washington. And then, just an ugly affair back and forth for both offenses, really for Washington and for the Chicago Bears in that week 8 game against the Commanders. And of course, the Hail Mary that certainly feels like an inflection point on the Bears season, because they've lost every game since then. And they truly have not felt like they've gotten off the mat the way that they need to. So to get from where optimism was so high, too high probably, clearly going into the regular season, coming out of training camp, to where the team's at right now, I feel like it's kind of a reality check for people inside this building where I'm at right now at Hallis Hall to know, okay, what were we not right on? What did we overshoot? What did we underaddress? And to figure out, is there a way to salvage the season from getting completely out of control, knowing that Green Bay comes to town this weekend in week 11, and you've got 6 of your division games all in a stretch of the final 8 weeks of the season. And it's not hard to think, or not implausible to think that they could be 4-9 by the time, early December, after the first week of early December, over these next 4 games.
Yeah. I think the easiest team they probably have on their schedule is the Seattle Seahawks. Yeah, which is, and they're not like an easy team necessarily. So we'll have to see how that shakes out, and we'll get into that more here as we go. I almost feel like we wouldn't, maybe the panic mode wouldn't be as high as it is if that Washington game hadn't have happened the way it did, which was incredibly unlikely, but it did. And so that's where we're at. So with the firing of Shane Waldron, I don't want to have a bash Shane Waldron fest, and I'm sure you've been through that this whole entire week here, but what kind of was that situation on the offense and why they made the switch? And then is there anything that we can realistically expect to change with Thomas Brown in charge of that now.
You saw signs that this thing was not getting off to the right start as early as week 1, where yeah, it was Caleb throwing for 93 yards. Like, that's going to happen from time to time. Like, quarterback, especially a young quarterback who, doesn't have a great offensive line. I think that's kind of where you need to start about like how they may have judged this improperly. Ryan Poles, the Wednesday before week 1, comes out and does his, preseason ending press conference, talking about training camp, talking about the offseason, how he feels about his team headed into the year. And when he was talking about the offensive line depth, he said, this is the best depth I've ever been around. And of course, things happen, injuries happen. You have to account for those things. But, right away in week 1, Ryan Bates, who, was at a point, you're trying to figure out what are you going to do with him, like Nate Davis. Are you going to be a starting right guard? You're not going to be a starting right guard. Well, Nate Davis just got released after 10 weeks of it was one of the worst signings that they've had under this regime. But like that first week, Ryan Bates goes down. So then you're forced to play a player who, clearly was like mentally checked out, not practicing very hard, all the things we had heard were going on. And the line was in a state of flux from the very beginning. It didn't just start when they lost Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright for the better part of 2 games. Like, this had been a question mark. So where the season started to where, it's with those questions along the offensive line to the point of personnel usage. Like, Cole Kmet has been such a weird season for the top tight end on this team, where week 1, he's barely featured. He was a complete afterthought. You've got Travis Homer, who's like your third running back, getting into the mix more than you expected. Same thing with Gerald Everett, the number 2 tight end on this team. They were targeting Keenan Allen, I believe it was 11 or 10 times. And of course he gets injured in that game. Like, the offense felt very disjointed from the very beginning of the season. And even in that 3-game win streak, it didn't feel like they were doing enough to make sure that they could create stability with what was going right offensively. It felt like they just could not figure out how to put their best players, in the position to be successful. And ultimately that led to the demise of the offense. And it led to the regression I feel like we've seen the last 3 games with Caleb Williams.
Mm. Yeah. Do you think so? One of the things that some people maybe would point to as putting a player in their best position is with rookie receiver Rome Odunze. I saw a chart, I believe it was Monday, and it probably come out from Matt Harmon, so we'll give him a plug there on Rome Odunze, in that he has a lot of very successful routes when they are a typical X wide receiver type of route, but those were not the routes that he was typically being utilized on. Will Thomas Brown be able to come in and hopefully change some of those type of things? And are there any other changes you'd expect from him specifically?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when Matt Eberflus tells us this week that the offense isn't creative enough, that's, he said, I want to see more creativity with what's being called, with what's being designed, and that he thinks there can be significant change, even in a short stretch. Like, you basically cut 36 hours off of game prep, because you didn't have Shane Waldron doing that. You had, or maybe you did, and maybe you just threw it out the window because you fired him on Tuesday. Like, you put a lot more on your new offensive coordinator, Thomas Brown, to turn something around that kind of feels like it might take a little bit longer to do so. And are they even capable of doing it in the year is the big question. But for starters, you've got to be able to figure out what, like, getting back to the basics of this offense, the West Coast offense that had like the principles of play action pass, marrying the run and the pass, like very simple concepts in theory, just like when we talk about them, none of that has existed. It's all been disjointed. There have been times where Caleb's dropping back and he's waiting 5 seconds because the routes his receivers are running, they're all covered, so he doesn't know where to throw it. There's no quick check down option, and when there is, sometimes he doesn't take it. So it's getting through all of the muck that's basically there and being like, what can we do well? And what can we do well simply just to get some easy completions for this quarterback? They've gotten away from running the ball effectively during those 3 games that they won. DeAndre Swift was a big factor in that. He scored a touchdown in every game. He had over 100 yards from scrimmage every game. And now it's not like that. Like, the run game has fallen stagnant, so it's made the offense one-dimensional. And then when Caleb's getting into a straight drop back game, he can't win because, you know, it even goes back further than that. Like they didn't break some of the habits that they needed to with him coming out of USC. Like the best stat I've found to describe this is the 36 dropbacks he's had in 9 games where he's held onto the ball 5 or more seconds. Wow. On those dropbacks, he's been pressured 92% of the time, and it's led to 15 of his 38 sacks. So you can infer through those numbers that he's holding onto the ball too long in certain situations. Some of that, like on third down, I get it. There's certain circumstances where you're trying to extend a drive, go get the extra yards, do what you have to do. You can't fault him for all of those things, but that's not happening on just third downs. Like it's not a good sign when one of his bigger issues, bad habits, I'd call it, from USC is still popping up at as consistent of a rate as it is through 10 weeks of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so you mentioned the creativity and then some of those habits. How do we separate what and judge, maybe, if that's the right word here, mm-hmm. Caleb Williams and his performance, just given the struggles that the offense has had in general? You mentioned the line. I mean, there's 1, 2, I think there's 3 offensive linemen that are on the injury report just today. Is it possible to even give him a grade? Is it fair to do that? How do we even kind of give him a mid-season evaluation as it?
It's difficult because you can look at what happened in those 3 games that they won and say that's Caleb Williams at his best because he's going through his progressions. He's making the hard throws. Like I remember this one throw. I think it was Keenan Allen's second touchdown that he had in London. And Caleb Williams hits him on the back shoulder after going through multiple progressions in the red zone. It was just the most perfectly placed pass that like demonstrated time on task. They've repped this a lot. Their chemistry is good. And then the week before that, I remember writing a story about like DJ Moore is this team's #1 receiver, and it's obvious to everybody watching it. Why is it not obvious to the Bears? What we saw against the Carolina Panthers is what needs to continue to happen. It's not like they haven't tried. Like if you go look at DJ's, for example, just bring him up because obviously he's come under fire a lot for body language, for facial expressions, for not criticism, like frustration mostly. And I don't blame him for being frustrated, but it's just like a fact of the matter of what the narrative is around him right now. But it's not like he's a complete afterthought. Like the game against Arizona, he was targeted 9 times. He was playing through an ankle injury that happened in the first quarter. That's why the whole thing about why did he go out of the game and then like not come back in, like on that one play when he walked off the field early. He was targeted 9 times that game. There have been instances like 8 targets against Carolina. That was the sweet spot. It led to him to get 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. But then there's been other games like 10 targets against Indy. He had 8 catches for 78 yards, 10 targets against the Houston Texans, 6 catches for 53 yards. So it's not like the ball's not going his way. It's just he and Caleb Williams, for whatever reason, maybe the concepts are too hard. Maybe they're asking Caleb to do too much in those moments. And like, it's the whole idea of like his feet being a mess. I've heard a lot of national analysts say that this week. I believe it was even like Ryan Fitzpatrick last night on the Thursday night game said his feet are just like not where they need to be. When everything is based on when like the way your receivers run their route, where they are, the top of their drop versus where you are in your drop back and like going through your progressions, none of that's marrying up. And that's very complicated. Like I totally get it, like why it's hard, but 10 weeks in, when you're seeing that big of an issue, you got to ask yourself, if you're Thomas Brown, are there ways to simplify that? Can we just live in 12 personnel for a little bit just to get by? Can we do more play action to roll Caleb Williams away from pressure, to get him out on the move? That's what made him so good at USC. So like, why weren't those things happening? That's a Shane Waldron question. And it's something that Thomas Brown's going to have to answer for now. But if you put him in a position where he feels like he can, inject a little bit more of that into the offense, then maybe you see the improvement of like getting Caleb Williams back to looking like the Caleb Williams this team saw weeks 4 through 6.
Yeah. And if you can marry that, like you kind of mentioned earlier, with some creativity of marrying the run game to the pass game with that play action, maybe you can get some of the boot movement or whatever to get him out on the move. I mean, Thomas Brown was, I believe, with the Rams, for 3 years before he was with the Panthers. So maybe he can bring some of that over. Although that's also what Waldron was supposed to do too. So
I know,
hopefully,
it's great.
yeah.
And I think some of it comes down to the fact that, like, you know, let's be honest about this. Shane Waldron was not going to be retained on Seattle staff. Had Pete Carroll not been ousted the way that he was, I don't think he was coming back. I don't. Like, from people I've talked to out there, that was the kind of the general consensus. That was there really that much improvement along the way with Shane Waldron in Seattle? Yeah, you had the Geno Smith year, but like, who, by and large, who got most of the credit for that year outside of Geno Smith? It was Dave Canales, the quarterbacks coach. That's why he got the job with the Bucks, and then very quickly went from the Bucks to the Panthers. And it's not to say that Shane Waldron, it was all terrible. I know that, like, this is the week, and we talked about it. Like, people are just kind of like, dogging on Shane Waldron week, and rightfully so to a degree. But the quarterback's not absolved of this. The receivers and the way that things are going with them, not absolved of the problem. The offensive line, like, sometimes you're kind of like SOL on a few things. Like, you're down 2-10. I don't know if I've ever covered a game in back-to-back weeks where you don't have your starting right and left tackle. Like, I know, Darnell Wright went down in the second half in Arizona, but like, that's a pretty dire situation when you have a guy replacing your left tackle in Larry Borum, who is just coming off IR for the first time all year, did not, to my understanding, have a great practice during the week before that Arizona game, because they had like 2 walkthroughs and 1 real day of practice. So how much work are you actually getting in? There's just a lot there offensively where you do this pie chart of blame. The bulk of the biggest piece goes to Shane Waldron, but like, there's, as cliche as it is, but the all 11 thing, like, it does feel like there are multiple places you can point to about why can't it look a little less disjointed than it does now, that's not solely on the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and that's, when you're the guy at the top, you're the one that catches all the bullets, whether whether you deserve them all the time or not, I suppose. I am curious, really quick, because you mentioned that Caleb. Everybody has to share some of this, right?
Sure.
I don't even want to call it a report necessarily, but were there actual legitimate conversations about this whole Tyson Bagent thing, players wanting him or not. I don't know how much legitimacy there is to that, so I wanted to just get your thoughts on that real quick.
So I'll speak to this. I talked to a player on Tuesday when this whole thing was unfolding. They fire Shane Waldron. You hear this stuff about certain vets have gone to Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, whoever it was, asking for Tyson Bagent to start. The way that it was interpreted to me is that, like, under no circumstances, players I've talked to on the record, off the record, they've all remained the same, like, steadfast that we want Caleb to succeed. Under no circumstances is it we don't like Caleb Williams. We want Tyson Bagent to start. And I think that some players have had a very realistic thought about, shoot, like, this guy needs to hit the reset button. Just, like, let him chill for a minute so he doesn't get killed back there. Like, you've been sacked 38 times, 15 times in 2 weeks. You're going to lose your confidence. This is going to become a Justin Fields situation all over again, where you run the risk of making that guy see ghosts out there because he's going to be, like, scared to death that he gets hit. And it's not to say that he's not a confident person, that he can't work through that. That's just the nature of this business when you have massive defensive players trying to rip your head off. So I think that there are certain players on this team that see that and are just want to help him do whatever he can to make sure that he doesn't go down the path of, like, having his career ruined before it really starts. Like, that's, to me, is where, like, the empathy part comes from within the team. I don't think nobody I've talked to has expressed it of, man, we got to win right now, and Caleb's not giving us the best chance to do that. Go and start Tyson Bagent. That's how I read the situation. And players I've spoken with have expressed, we just want to make sure that the coaches have the right plan for him, because very clearly it wasn't just that Caleb was struggling with Shane Waldron. Everyone was frustrated, and they were vocal about that for weeks. But these guys have his back. Like, even when the receivers seem frustrated, I have felt nothing from talking with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, any of these guys that, like, they're not happy with, like, who they have at quarterback. I think that there's just, like, this notion of something's not right. Are we going to continue to square peg round hole it, or is there a different solution that the team could come to in the short term?
Yeah, it'd be kind of wild if we had it would not be the exact same, because he has certainly played better than Anthony Richardson, but almost similar in some ways. And yeah, the 9 sacks against the Patriots was just brutal as you were watching it live. It just, man. So hopefully that doesn't affect him too much if he doesn't have a break, and they can work their way through all these opponents here, who we'll talk about in a bit. But regarding just, again, we'll go back a little bit to the surrounding, because if other people other than just the offensive coordinator share any blame, we've talked a bit about DJ Moore, and he's been targeted, I think, 60 times, 66 times, or something like that.
Yeah,
The highest on the
it's a
team.
team high, and he's number 2 right now in receiving. And Rome, obviously, his big day that he had, I believe it was in Arizona, like, kind of
Yeah.
inflates that number a little bit.
Yeah. So, like, if we were going to talk through those just a little bit, wide receiver, tight end, running back, you mentioned potentially moving a little bit more to 12 personnel, however that would work. How do you feel like each of those position groups has performed, just in general, and what we could potentially expect from them throughout the remainder of the season? And also, I don't know if this is a thing or not. Is Keenan Allen going to stay around next year, if we're able to speculate on that? So,
Yeah, so let's start with the running backs. Like, DeAndre Swift was awful to start the year, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. Like, through the first 3 games, he was averaging 1.8 yards per carry. They paid the guy a lot of money this offseason. They didn't pay for that. And he's a multi-purpose threat for them, for all intents and purposes. Like, he can catch passes out of the backfield. Once you get him in space, he can do a lot of damage. They didn't start doing that with him until week 4. So it's been up and down for him. Like, he kind of falls into the same like, as far as Caleb goes, DeAndre goes, and really it's like as DeAndre goes, Caleb goes. So I look at that situation and figure they have not utilized their running backs very well, by and large, throughout the season. I mean, you can go to the botched goal line play against the Indianapolis Colts, where they're in the shotgun on 4 straight, shotgun and then a pistol, and the speed option. Like, awful usage, awful play calls, whatever. Like, that didn't work. But then, like, the one that happened in Washington, where they're handing off to the backup center, trying to get a little too cute, maybe had too much time at the bye week to think about that, doesn't work. Like, and then it does work one drive later, or when they get back down there and they score with Roschon Johnson. The last touchdown drive they've scored. They haven't gone 23 straight drives since that moment without scoring a touchdown. So it's wild to me, like, just how inefficient the offense is. But the running back room has not been great, just in terms of how they've performed. But they have clear-cut defined roles. Like, we know what Roschon Johnson is, what packages he's coming in on certain downs. And we know that DeAndre Swift is their lead back. That's why they simplified things. They sent Khalil Herbert. They traded him. They weren't going to keep him around. That's just kind of the way that the hierarchy at that position was flushed out. Travis Homer's a special teams guy. Sometimes he'll get in there maybe on a change of pace situation, but they have the right personnel. They're just not utilizing them right. Then on to tight ends. Like, Cole Kmet really is your only tight end. Gerald Everett has been sprinkled in here and there, but like, Cole Kmet is... He and Caleb Williams, for all tight ends that have a minimum of 25 targets, so you're starting tight end. Those two have the highest completion percentage between the two of them. It's 85.3%, I believe. Yet he was not targeted in the Washington game. He had 1 target against Arizona. I asked Shane Waldron about that last week, and he did not give me much of an answer from that. Like, that's inexcusable to me. And it's not just that you're paying this guy a lot of money. He means a lot to this offense, and he can do a lot in this offense. So the fact that he's an afterthought is bizarre. Then the receivers, like, the whole thing going into the season is, wow, you got 1 football and 3,000-yard receivers. That's true, but they haven't been utilized as such. It's like they can't figure out how to play all of them in the same game. And some games might be the DJ Moore show. Some games might be the Keenan Allen show. 2 of them have been the Rome Odunze show, which was Indianapolis and the Arizona Cardinals, which you very quickly learned that, like, those were both losses, and that was kind of forgettable for him. But I think a lot of it tends to be like the utilization, which comes on play calling, but also the receivers just haven't been on the same page with Caleb Williams. And of course that's highlighted because him and DJ Moore, their gaffes are more noticeable. The one where DJ's, Caleb's trying to, has the back shoulder throw and DJ's running straight up the middle of the field. They don't connect on that. There was one in the red zone there where which goes for Keenan and DJ's there open. He doesn't hit DJ. Like, something's going on. It's a sign of a bigger problem, I think, in this offense, where the guy who had a perennial 1,000-yard receiver with, like, Will Greer and PJ Walker and Teddy Bridgewater and all of these names that are just kind of like a conglomerate of like quarterbacks who played in the NFL and didn't last very long, or just like, backups who were thrust in for a couple games. He put up 1,000-yard seasons with those guys. Why is it so hard now? Like, that is a huge question within this Bears team, because it doesn't make any sense. Last year, he has the career best year, 1,364 yards, 8 touchdowns, over 80 yards receiving a game, like all career highs, with Justin Fields and Tyson Bagent as his quarterbacks. He's nowhere close to that right now. I just pulled up the numbers. Like, for him to get there, I'd have to do the math on this. He has 398 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's down to 44.2 yards per game. Like, these are like career low numbers for DJ Moore at this point of the season that seem correctable, but like when they're talking about, well, we need to like have deeper conversations about what's going on, meaning like the details. What do you see? What do I see? Why is it taking them till like week 11 to figure that part out? And that was something that was said before the firing of Shane Waldron. It was said going into the game against the New England Patriots. That's alarming to me. When your quarterback and your number one receiver are they not having the right conversations on the field? What conversations are they having? It just doesn't make much sense that you're having this much disarray within a 2-person unit where one person should be the security blanket for your young rookie quarterback, and the rookie should be able to easily find him, but he's not.
Yeah, that's tough. And you wrote an article this week. I tweeted out, I think, earlier today. So if you're watching this, make sure to go and read that. Shane Waldron was the 8th coach that the Bears fired under Matt Eberflus, with all of the turnover and the struggles there. Again, it's probably not entirely fair to ask you this at this point in the season, but if you had to guess, do you think we have a new head coach next year or not?
It feels like it's trending that way, and it's not just the wins and losses, because, at this point, and you can't really blame it, like we were so injured. You didn't lose your quarterback. You haven't lost, there've been injuries here and there, but like that's not like the full reason why you'd give him another season. Like, how has he handled all of this? I think the way that Washington was handled kind of, it created a course correct, because now he's responsible for everything. When, he didn't want to take any responsibility for, why didn't you send pressure on the second to last play before the Hail Mary? Why did nobody realize? You have a million coaches on staff. You have people up in the booth, people on the field. Why did nobody see Tyreek Stevenson, the play before the Hail Mary, jawing with fans? Like, all of these things, it felt like he was trying to not skirt necessarily, but try to say that they weren't a big deal, that it came down to the final play. That's a big deal. Now it's, I take full responsibility. It all falls on me. I need to be better. The change in tone makes me feel like he's feeling the pressure from internally on that. But I think beyond that, it's the story that I wrote today. He's fired 8 coaches in the last 14 months. And I know it's very difficult to form a staff, especially when it's your first staff. So like the group that, brought on like Luke Getsy, and then Luke Getsy's offensive coaches. And then on the defensive side of the ball, like he had worked with Alan Williams for 4 seasons in Indianapolis. And then he resigned under mysterious circumstances. You can't tell me like, it doesn't smell right. Like, and I know coaches are pressed for time, and it's like, all right, let's just get a staff together. The first staff might not be the greatest, but let's do it. So then you had like 9 different offensive coordinator candidates after you make 7 firings last year, from in season to like the day of the season ending press conference, which was 72 hours removed from the Green Bay loss in week 18. You had to get it right this time, because even though at that time you may not have for certain knew that you were going to draft Caleb Williams or keep Justin Fields, you at least knew that you needed the right infrastructure. So you let Cliff Kingsbury, Zach Robinson, Liam Cohen, like guys who have like really good offenses. I mean, Greg Roman and Clint Kubiak both got jobs too, but like, you got 2-3 coaches who have top 15 offenses, and you let them out the door. Yes, I understand their situations are different. They have veteran quarterbacks, but even still, was that the right move? No, clearly it wasn't. You went with a guy who had an offense that was right around where the Bears ranked last year. Somebody who frankly didn't pose a threat to Matt Eberflus for his job if he was feeling that sort of pressure and that heat, because the conversation about his job security last year was a topic, a major one going into the offseason. So did you just make the safe move to save yourself, and did that end up potentially costing yourself? We'll never know, but it's definitely so much like deeper than the surface of wins and losses will determine whether they're hiring a new head coach, and have a coaching search in January. I think a lot of this these seeds have already been sowed in certain respects of, we've seen what 2.5 seasons of Matt Eberflus has gotten this team, 14 wins and 29 losses. And the way some of those games have been lost, especially go back to last year with like a historic amount of blown leads in the fourth quarter. That stuff doesn't just get like wiped away because you're in a new season. All that stuff has a cumulative effect on whether he keeps his job. And right now it does not feel like that's going to be the case in January.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that perspective of why he maybe made the hire just from a safety standpoint. Because, yeah, if he would have, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it has to be brought up as a possibility, because think about some of those other names that were thrown around, especially Cliff Kingsbury. I know that the Washington Commanders just lost 2 games, and, a close game. And then the one that they had last night, like they were trying to be aggressive. They, backfired, whatever. And Jane Daniels is playing hurt right now. We know that. He's going to be a head coach next year. No questions asked. I feel like Kingsbury is gone unless he wants to pull a Ben Johnson and just stay to see what year 2 is going to be like. But you can't tell me that if the offense, like if you had a coordinator building an offense like that here in Chicago for Caleb Williams, who he had already had experience with, this wouldn't have been a fresh coach, quarterback connection. Like, no, he wasn't his on-field coach. He wasn't the voice in his headset at, they didn't have the in-game communication at USC until this year, but he wasn't like the one who was talking to on the sideline during the games, because he was a senior offensive analyst. But at least it would have been familiarity. His job at USC was to get Caleb Williams ready for the NFL, and they chose not to. They chose the safe option, and it backfired.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, we'll have to wonder if anything more will eventually leak out about that or not at some point down the road. But that makes what you're saying makes 100% sense to me, and you're right. I bet Cliff will be getting a job, and if he doesn't, yeah, I'm sure he'll be a candidate the year following. So as long as he doesn't pull, I guess, a Bobby Slowick down there in Houston, but we'll see what happens there too. As you mentioned in the article, things are not going to get easier for the Bears down the stretch here. They have the toughest remaining schedule in the league. Looking at, they've got Green Bay this coming week. They're, I think, updated now at -5, or Green Bay's -5.5 points.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Vikings, the Lions, the Niners, the Vikings again, the Lions again, the Seahawks, who we mentioned earlier, and then the Packers to finish off the season. It is going to be tough to find some wins in there. Earlier in the season, I believe preseason odds were like over under 8.5 wins. They're sitting at 4 right now. Do you feel like they can even squeeze out 2 in there, or it's just a tough spot to be in?
It's hard. It's hard with the state of the division right now, and nobody knows that more than the Green Bay Packers, who are 0-2 in division play. They fought back in that second half against the Minnesota Vikings and made it a far closer game than it was early on, and they still lost 24-10 to the Green Bay or to the Detroit Lions, and they outgained it by 150 yards in that game. So if that team, which is a good football team, an organization that just like repeatedly gets it right at the quarterback spot, if they are having a hard time in division play, I can only imagine what it's going to look like for the Chicago Bears. So, the over-under, I think I said 8 or 9 wins to start the year. Like, I feel like if they get to 6, that'll be surprising just based on what the schedule is. And that's a weird spot to be in, because, and that was the other, I remember saying early on, there would be no way they'd fire Matt Eberflus. Even if they had the same record as they did last year, or if they somehow made the playoffs, because there were people who didn't want to see him remain the head coach. They wanted to see an offensive minded coach here to guide the quarterback. I remember saying preseason, barring a 4-13 finish, he will be the head coach again. We could be very well on the way to 4-13, given the way things are right now.
Yeah. Well, either way, whether he's the head coach or not, do we still believe, I should say, maybe put it that way, that Caleb Williams has the potential to succeed in this league, and we still have that hope?
The hope exists, as it should, because he's a very talented player. Like, he's not a bust. You can't label a guy as a bust after 9 games. You really can't. And clearly the coaching was such an issue that the Bears did something they've never done, which is to fire a coordinator in season. He's got a lot of fixing that needs to happen. The scary part of all of this is that, if they don't win another game, or if it's really bad, they're probably going to clean house with everyone. And that means that he's on his third offensive coordinator by his 18th game of his NFL career. That's horrible to put somebody in that position when it was completely preventable. And the blame goes on everybody. It goes on Shane Waldron, it goes on Matt Eberflus, it goes on Ryan Poles for keeping Matt Eberflus, to allow him to make these hires with his staff and make these firings with his staff. So it's weird when it's like, God, how did they get here? Well, you can trace the dots or connect the dots. This didn't happen overnight. This isn't just like, wow, they woke up one day and they were terrible and the quarterback's awful and everything else is wrong. They took conscious steps to get here that ended up backfiring on them, and giving them the worst case scenarios. So this is the question that's always been asked. Would Patrick Mahomes be Patrick Mahomes if the Bears took him in 17, overtaking Mitchell Trubisky? I don't know. With the staff that they have here right now, and the staff that they had then, and then the staff that they had in between then, and everything else, the best quarterback. The Chiefs should be thanking the Chicago Bears, because the best quarterback that I've seen in my years covering the NFL, because I didn't cover Brady in his prime, but the best quarterback I've seen might not be that had he been drafted by the Bears, just because they've shown a complete inability to draft and develop a franchise quarterback.
Man, it is tough in this league. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to speak to you again, maybe depending on afterwards, after the draft, or sometimes later. I appreciate you for joining us for the second time again, Courtney. You've been very generous with your time. Before I let you go, though, where can everybody find you and hear you, all of that stuff?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is my Instagram handle, at Courtney R. Cronin. I haven't, what is the new one, Blue Sky, everybody's on? I'm not on there yet. Apparently a lot of people from the sports media realm are joining, so I guess I kind of have to. I guess check back with me at some point to see if I do make the jump. I don't need another social media platform. But Around the Horn, usually Monday, Tuesdays are my day there on ESPN. And then, of course, all of my work you can find at ESPN.com.
All right, so make sure to check her out again, Courtney R. Cronin. Courtney, thanks for joining us. Everybody else, we appreciate you joining us as well. Make sure to check out us if you're not watching us on Twitter here, or X rather, at 32 Beat Writers. Appreciate you joining. For Courtney Cronin, I'm Zach Hiduk, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Beyond the Beat with Zach Hiduk and Matt Olson. For more expert analysis and exclusive insights from the best in the game, don't forget to subscribe and stay ahead of the competition. Until next time, keep turning that insider knowledge into fantasy football wins.